The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus instructed the 12 as follows: "Do not be afraid, for everything that is now covered will be uncovered, and everything now hidden will be made clear. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the daylight. What you hear in whispers, proclaim from the housetops. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Fear him rather, who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Can you not buy 2 sparrows for a penny, and yet not one falls to the ground without your Father knowing? Why, every hair on your head has been counted. So there is no need to be afraid. You are worth more than hundreds of sparrows. So if anyone declares himself for me in the presence of men, I will declare myself for him in the presence of my Father in heaven. But the one who disowns me in the presence of men, I will disown in the presence of my Father in heaven." The Gospel of the Lord. Many are aware, sometimes other Catholics not so aware, but in the 20th century, and including this century, the 21st century, there are Christians, and especially Catholics, who have to live very literally what Jesus is speaking about in the Gospel today. They must declare themselves for Christ in the presence of men and suffer the consequences. And many times in the last 120 years, people have had to die, often terrible deaths, for the sake of Christ. And I say that to remind us that martyrdom is not just a thing of the past. It's not just from the early church or the Middle Ages or in the Holy Land, but Christians have died in their thousands all the way through the 20th century and still continuing to this day. Catholics are still being martyred in a cruel way in Nigeria by the Islamic militant radicals. Remember, the Soviet Union for 70 years or more persecuted the church thoroughly in Poland and all those Eastern European countries, including, of course, Russia. And many, many priests, many Christians died as a result of the persecution. The communist regime that was there was utterly atheistic and anti-Christian, anti-God in a systematic way. It shut down worship and persecuted anybody who spoke up against that regime. And I was watching some documentaries recently on that whole history, and one of the things that one of the Soviet people said, Russian people, afterwards they said that what was the worst was not the censorship and the lack of free speech and the constraints and the suffocation that was put on the people, but it was the way in which the people in the end self-censored because of what was going on. It's understandable, of course, at a human level to survive, to not lose one's family. One ends up living this half-life underground, hiding one's worship, but also never allowed to speak freely, fear of denunciation, of being reported to the authorities and then being imprisoned in the thousands of work camps that only later came to light. Millions of people died in them, of course, through starvation and overwork. And there it was so cruel. But what this Soviet man was saying was that what was the worst was that people constrained themselves and thereby lost their moral integrity, lost the truth of their conscience, lost their sense of identity as Christians because they willingly closed their mouths. And once again, it's understandable, but that was the result of it. And my brothers and sisters, as many of you know well, throughout that same 20th century and now in the 21st, those same Marxist ideas, which are anti-God, anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, and incredibly anti-human, have now slowly, through various mechanisms and various ways, arrived in the West, such that all the social justice warriors of our time, people that are militant about climate change, militant about the rainbow cause, the LGBTQ plus stuff, all the work of promoting critical race theory and feminism, they've all been poisoned by these same Marxist ideas. And in the West, it's called cultural Marxism. It's not the slave, peasant, working class rising up to overthrow the bourgeoisie who's been oppressing them through economic systems. It's now every other system in the West must be overthrown because it's all been a system of oppression. The patriarchy, the church, the society and the way it's structured, everything, including education, all the ways we think we must start from zero in order to bring about equality. And of course, as you know well, now in our present time, it's no longer just acceptable to be silent on these things and navigate through as Christians, because we're the minority, we don't always manifest exactly what we think because we know we'll be laughed down, mocked, ridiculed, sometimes even not be given a promotion at work. I've known people who, when they've worked in the media, for example, in television, if they revealed that they were Christian and really believed, there's no way they would have been promoted because it was run by a cabal of homosexuals who hate the church. And it's a subtle form of persecution where self-censorship goes on. Christians then hold their faith to themselves, don't want to speak honestly because they're hoping to keep their job, for their mortgage, for their children, for their career. Understandable once again at one level. But at another level, we slowly compromise ourselves into a kind of oblivion and lose our soul in the process. I'm not saying that everyone has to stand up and proclaim things from the rooftops, but I'm just giving the effect that it has on the Christian people. But now we're not in that situation. It's becoming more and more clear that not only do we keep our views to ourselves that are not acceptable, so silence, but now we must sign up to mandatory creeds of belief and follow explicit speech dictates that are being imposed on the population. So when someone's signing their work contract, there'll be a clause that you must follow along with the LGBTQ plus tick and also identify your pronouns and use the pronouns of others who want their pronouns to be pronounced in the way that they want. So now, not just silence, but imposition of a creed, a kind of woke religious creed now. Otherwise, punishment. Otherwise, demotion. Otherwise, even, yes, loss of employment. And that's happened recently. A teacher, Christian teacher in the schools in New Zealand, refused to use the pronouns of a student who wanted to identify opposite to their natal sex and gender, birth, sex, gender, was brought before the tribunal of teachers, the whole registration board, and lost his employment over that because he refused to use the pronouns that were being requested of him. Mandatory speech dictates, communist Marxist tactics to force people to say something that they don't believe in, something that they know contrary to reality, something they know contrary to the creation, something they know contrary to the revelation. There, my brothers and sisters, it's clear for us, as Christians, more and more, we are being pushed to the fringes. That's been going on for decades. But now, in certain employments, certain contracts at work, certain areas of social life, Christians must now sign up and manifest something either in gesture, so a signature, or by word, through speech, that they know not to be true and contrary to their conscience and contrary to their faith. Explicit forcing of people to deny themselves. And Jesus says, if anyone declares himself for me in the presence of men, I will declare myself for him in the presence of my Father in heaven. But anyone who disowns me in the presence of men, I will disown in the presence of my Father in heaven. The Catechism of the Catholic Church is very clear that this kind of witness is necessary for salvation. That's the phrase that's used in the Catechism when commenting on this passage. That if we disown Christ in the various ways that we can, we will lose our salvation. We apostatize in a certain way. Now, sometimes it's very clear. If someone says, deny Christ or I'll kill you, and that happened under ISIS, happened among many Christians in the Middle East in that period, and they had to refuse, and there are beautiful stories, incredible stories of Christians refusing to renounce the name of Christ and had their heads literally hacked from their bodies. And they are martyrs and saints in heaven. Incredible. Just recently on Friday, we honored and we commemorated and we venerated St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher, famous saints who lost their lives during the English Revolution against the Catholic Church by Henry VIII. They refused to sign the Oath of Supremacy. The Oath of Supremacy was a special mechanism, political mechanism used by Henry VIII to usurp the position of the Pope as the head of the Church, the universal Church, arrogating to himself an authority he had no right to take or have, saying that he was the one that would give the bishops their mandates to govern in their dioceses, and he was the head of the Church, directly contrary to the revelation of Christ giving Peter as universal pastor to the universal Church, an office directly given by Christ. And there Henry VIII, because he was corrupt, wanted to take another wife and have an heir, bigamy and polygamy, he was into all that stuff. He decided to do away with that problem of authority of the Pope and install himself there. And the way that he was going to get the hierarchy, the bishops in England, to submit was to sign up to the Oath of Supremacy, which proclaimed this. Unfortunately, all the bishops except John Fisher did it. And Thomas More was the Chancellor. He was the highest legal man in the land, kind of like the Prime Minister to the King. And he refused. Now Thomas More was a lawyer, very intelligent. He tried to navigate through the whole thing as best as he could, using mental reservations, so never entirely speaking what he thought, trying to avoid direct confrontation with the legal mechanisms and all of the trial that he was put through, all the inquisition into what he thought and believed. He was very clever, never denying the truth or denying Christ, but trying to avoid losing his head, losing his job, and also being separated from his family. But when push came to shove and the final analysis, when they made him sign the document or be executed. Incredible courage from Thomas More. Said, no, can't do it. You're asking me to deny Christ, to deny what he's given in the church, to deny the authority of the Pope, and to promote something which is not true, the authority of the king in that manner, and to deny my own conscience. I refuse. And there he was executed. And remember that famous phrase from Thomas More, the king's good servant I remain, but God's first. And died. And now we honor him. We venerate him and hold him up as a hero of the faith. His daughter came to see him when he was in the Tower of London in prison, pleaded with him to just sign. It's just a signature. It's just words. You can do this and believe something else in your mind. Stay with us. What about the good of your family and your wife? What about the good you could do if you stay in office? Convince the king. Do some good otherwise. Thomas More rebuked her as a servant of the devil, trying to tempt him to betray his faith. And held firm because he saw clearly that to do this would be to break with Christ, his greatest good, and to deny Christ in the presence of men. And it was necessary for his salvation that he hold and not betray his faith, his God, and of course even betray himself and his family, because it was for his family's good that he remained true in this regard, even though he died in the process. And there, my brothers and sisters, we are getting closer and closer to these situations where people will say, I want you to use words or sign documents that sign up to things that you know are not true and that deny beliefs of your faith in the creation and in the redemption, and compromise your conscience. So, what do we do when we're in a situation of a social setting or a friendship or in a workplace where a person asks us to use pronouns that are directly contrary to their natal sex and gender? I think it's clear we have to say no, respectfully, and say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to lie to you, and you can't ask me to lie. You're asking me to do something evil against my conscience and against my faith. You're asking me to betray what I know to be true. I'm sorry, I won't do this. Even if we are mocked, ridiculed, berated, insulted, rejected in our friendships, we must proclaim Christ in the presence of men and suffer the consequences, including when our boss says, this is our new policy, you must sign up to this, you must put in your email your pronouns in order to fit the green tick and rainbow tick of the company. I think, my brothers and sisters, there also we have to say no. Because even if we use correct pronouns for ourselves, he, him, she, her, which are accurate to reality and to the truth of our faith, we enter into a system that is a mutual interaction of lies. And there we get politically compromised, socially compromised, morally compromised by saying yes, like in that Soviet system, to go along and then lose ourselves step by step in the process. Because what will be next? Even though we agree to the he and her and what's accurate to ourselves, suddenly that will be used against us in the next step of the process to say, look, you said yes, now use the pronouns across the table of this meeting for the one who's in front of you that you know not to be true. So it's the first step on a slippery slope. It's the thin end of the wedge that opens up the door into a far more problematic moral situation and compromising situation for ourselves. And for that reason, I think it's also very clear We should not buy into the process. Now, at the beginning, like St. Thomas More did, very cleverly used words to navigate, to avoid the full confrontation, to have to say what he really thought and avoid denying what he knew to be true. Someone might make a joke at the beginning, my pronouns are Lord and Master. Say it. Every time you refer to me in the third person, Lord and Master. Now the danger with that, and that can be done at the beginning, is that they might say, fine, I'll do that, but you have to use my pronouns. And there we're trapped, forced as it were to use a lie again. And my brothers and sisters, we're never allowed to lie that good come of it. We're not allowed to use an evil that good come of it. That is one of the foundational principles of Catholic moral teaching. It's in the Scriptures taught by St. Paul. It's also properly deduced in a healthy, realistic philosophy. We are never allowed an evil, never allowed to use an evil to achieve a good. Whatever that good might be, avoiding the loss of my employment, keeping my career intact, being able to pay my mortgage, feed my children, we are never allowed to use a direct evil, objective, intrinsic evil to achieve a good. Or put it otherwise. We are never allowed to use a means at the service of an end that is intrinsically wrong, or the ends do not justify the means in these kinds of cases. My brothers and sisters, it's very clear, I think. We have to be willing to suffer and do it respectfully, do it charitably, do it honestly, but we cannot use pronouns that contradict reality, because then we do violence to our own intelligence also. When we lie, when we manifest something with our lips that we know not to be true with our intelligence, we create an internal tension in ourselves that compromises us and breaks our being apart. We, in our body, stretch ourselves to a point where we are working against the interior good of our soul. And that's what the challenge is for all martyrs. All martyrs in the history of the church are put in these situations. And in that situation, the martyr who we love and venerate and hold up as a hero is the one who sees clearly and realizes, I must hold to the ultimate good God in Christ, even if I lose other wonderful goods of my life, my own life, my wife, my children, my God, my job. We must hold to the good of our soul, ultimately who is the Lord himself, and be willing to lose everything else in the process. Hard, very, very hard to do, under serious pressure, but God will always look after his own. God will always provide for those who remain faithful to their faith and to him. Some people might say to me, easy for you to say, you're a priest, you don't face these challenges in the world. And in many ways that's not true. It might be a little bit true that I'm not in the work environment, but I certainly know the overt persecution when I wander around in a cassock in the shops. There's certainly a lot of antagonism towards the Catholic Church, especially towards the priesthood, because of the sexual abuse crisis. I know what it is to feel a certain hatred on behalf of Christ. But I can tell you also inside the church, in terms of institutional structures, I went through a seminary, 7 years of study, which was kind of like a communist camp. Sad to say, I know, and maybe a bit shocking and scandalous, but I can tell you that the seminaries in the West so often are ideological mind control mechanisms that do not work on behalf of the church, but look to weed out those who have the faith and promote those who don't. And the whole history, there's been books written on this, all of the evidence compiled and chronicled, and I can testify this to myself, that the institutions in the church so often are corrupt and are agents of ideological imposition and doctrinal control. And there, yes, I know, with my brothers who went through, we're well aware of what it's like to live under that kind of pressure. And it's worse in the seminary because you're there 24/7. They look into every aspect of your life. They dig up every aspect of your history to make sure, you're going to be decent as a priest. That goes on thoroughly, and you have to submit to it and without compromising your soul. And I did that for 7 years. I know what it's like. I know what those mechanisms and those pressures are. And it's worse in another way because there's no other option in New Zealand. There's only one seminary. At least in a company, you can resign and go to another company. You can find another way forward. There's only one way to be a priest in New Zealand, and it's through the National Seminary. And there you have to navigate with this kind of mechanism without losing one's conscience and one's integrity. My brothers and sisters, we are now in a world which is anti-Christ, anti-God, anti-Catholic, and pushing and promoting things which come directly onto us now. No longer is silence acceptable. It's no longer just about inclusion and tolerance, no longer about, a little bit of approval. Now it's full-blown celebration, and you must submit to our woke doctrine or we will punish you. And there we must stand and be true to Christ, knowing that He has our back. If we stand up for Him, He will stand up for us. And there, if we have Christ on our side, we have everything. If God be for us, who shall stand against us? There, let us testify to that truth in our very life. Hard, I know, but with God's grace and with the invocation of the prayers of someone like St. Thomas More, let us be confident that He will pray and support us. We're in good company with those kinds of heroes. And when that witness is given, it has an effect on others. When Thomas More went to the guillotine with John Fisher, it was 1535. In 1559, only a few years later, just over 20 years, the reversal happens. When John Fisher refused to sign, he was the only bishop that stood, and there was another Carthusian priest with him. All the other bishops gave way and signed, compromised and apostatized, lost their faith. Hopefully they came back round, repented, went to confession and got things right. Just over 20 years later, when Elizabeth I is the Queen in England, a Protestant queen, it goes Henry VIII, Edward VI, his son, and they're Protestants. Mary comes in as a Catholic queen, tries to rectify things. It all goes a bit awry. She dies without an heir, and Elizabeth I comes in, who is a Protestant queen. She reinstitutes all the persecution, contrary to what the Hollywood movies shows. She wasn't a great respecter of conscience. And she reimposes the oath of supremacy in a more draconian and severe way. And the good news is that now only one bishop gave way and signed. All the others refused. They lost their offices, and many of them were executed because of the witness of someone like Thomas More. He had been held up like a hero. And they saw, yes, we've misunderstood, or maybe they'd come to the office at a later point. They look back and they realize what's going on. We must stand. And they die for their faith, and they are saints. Let us take them as our heroes, me included, and pray for the grace to see clearly, to navigate wisely and prudently, and the courage to hold firm even if we suffer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.